by God's will, and yet everything happens by God's will, and yet we work since God's will is expressed through our acts. We work since God's will is expressed through our acts. Meditate every morning and evening. Meditate every morning and evening. This keeps your work on the right path. This keeps your work on the right path. Meditate mornings, meditate evenings. This keeps your work on the right path.
Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Maham Jyotirgamaya Mrityormam Amritam Gamaya Avir Avir Maedhi Rudra Yatte Dakshinam Mukaham Te Namaham Pahinityam. Om. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality. Reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So welcome to you all this morning. It's good to see some live people in the audience. My subject this morning is karma and character. And we're going to be talking a little bit about the philosophy of action and the psychodynamics of our behavior and how our thoughts, our speech, and our deeds go to shape and to construct our character and determine our destiny. Let's start with the word karma. Karma is a word that's often translated literally as action. But all actions are not karma. The blowing of the wind through the trees is an action, but it's not karma. When a fire burns wood, that is, fire is the agent, it does the action of burning, but that's not karma. Karma only refers to human action. Animals don't make karma. Plants don't make karma, although they are jivatmans, that is, they are embodied beings. The gods in heaven don't make karma. They enjoy the fruits of their karma from their actions on the earth, but they don't make any new karma. Similarly, with the unfortunate denizens of the nether worlds, they also bear and suffer the results of their karma, but they don't make any new karmic action. Karma means only human action, which is done in the karma bhumi. That means in this world, in the waking state. That is, it does not refer, it only refers to self-conscious volitional action. You don't make any karma in your dreams. And if you were born in ancient Egypt, and you were a slave in ancient Egypt, and you were driven along under the whip to build one of the pyramids, at that time, being forced to act, you're not making karma. That is, the whole psychodynamics are different. So the word karma refers to self-conscious volitional action. Oftentimes, the word is translated as work. Work, because after all, that's in the workaday world. We spend most of our time at work. But karma means more than work. That is, it includes not only those things which we are obliged to do, but those things which we do just for fun. So both our work and our play are considered to be karmic actions. Then too, when we think about karma, when we think here about action, we often naturally think about physical behavior. When we talk about our deeds, we think about things which we have done. But the word karma refers to our thoughts. It governs the actions of our thoughts. And it also governs speech acts. So karma is all about our thoughts, our words, and our deeds. Now let's look here let's look at what is an act of karma. What is an action? In a philosophy of action, we can analyze an action very easily. That is to say, what we do, we have a reason for what we do, and we have a desire. Let's say that for example, I have a belief that I can raise my hand. And now I have a desire to raise my hand. So I have a belief and I have a desire. Those are the reasons behind my behavior. Then there's a gap. Then there is, when I try to actually do the action, there is an intention in action. That is, I try to raise my hand, and lo and behold, my hand goes up. That's the end result, the condition of satisfaction of a complete action. You see how it begins with thoughts and a desire. Behind, we form a prior intention to act. Then there is a gap, there's a space. Then there is the intention in action, that is, we consciously try to do it. Then there is the bodily movement or the speech act, and that's the complete karma. If any one of those pieces are missing, then the karma is not successful. It is not a complete action. Let's look a little more closely at an act of karma. There's two things we can notice. Number one, it is intentional. That means you act for a reason. You have a reason for acting, and you have a desire. But after that, there's a space, there's a gap. That is the gap of free will. You have a free will choice at that point in the concatenation of the phases of the karmic cycle. You choose. That is, I know I can raise my hand. I want to raise my hand. Nothing's happening. That's because I haven't made a free will choice to raise my hand. Now I've chosen to raise my hand. I'm going to raise my hand, but I still am not trying. Okay, now I'm trying to raise my hand. My hand goes up. So every action is a karmic action is intentional. A karmic action also has a moral valence. That means we can say that it's good or bad, that is right or wrong, particularly in the context of spiritual practice, the context of self-development. We can analyze our behaviors in those terms. That is to say, they're either good or they're bad. What does that mean? That means either the behavior leads us onward and upward to realize our life goal. That means it leads upward to God. We visualize the great city, the great mountain, all beings in the world, climbing the mountain, the high goal, top of the mountain, the immortal city of Brahman. That's up. That's good. So we can do an action which will lead us to our goal, or we can do an action which will lead us downwards and away from our goal. So those are two kinds of actions that we can do. All actions are governed by the law of karma. The law of karma is just the great law of balance. It says that in the words of the Christian Bible, it says, whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. If we do good actions, then we're going to reap good results. If we do bad actions, we'll reap bad results. Who sows must reap, they say, and cause must bring its sure effect. Good, good, bad, bad, and none escape the law. This is the law. There's a natural law that governs all of our actions. It's called the law of karma. The law of karma also can be expressed is comparable to Newton's third law of motion. That is, it correlates what we in the gross physical world we call the law of action and reaction, which means, like in outer space, that the missiles, the rocket, how does it maneuver in outer space? I mean, if it blasts off from Earth, it pushes against the Earth and it pushes against the atmosphere. That exploding rocket fuel has something to push against, but in outer space, it has nothing to push against, and yet it still can be used to position and move the rocket. How does that happen? That's because of the law of action and reaction. So that's the law which governs our behavior, the great law of karma. And whenever we do an action, it's going to leave an impression on the mind. That is to say, every action has got two different effects. But basically, it's going to leave an impression on the mind. Now, by an impression there is kind of a vague translation. Does it leave? What it usually means is that an action, what remains after an action, is a memory trace. In psychology, it's called an engram. It's like a mark on the brain stuff or in the neuronic material mark. We could call it an impression. So we could say that as a result of this karma, we can say that it leaves an impression. But this is the impression which is left is called a samskara. A samskara is a little bit different from a memory trace. A samskara is an interested memory. That is a memory of something which you have done self-consciously, volition. That is all of our experiences. Anything that we experience or that happens to us, we remember. in addition to everything that we have done with a self-conscious volitional intention. All that is remembered. A samskara is the result of our karmic action. That is to say, we could call it an interested, a self-interested impression. For example, if you're out driving your car, you pass by an unfortunate motorist who's had an accident. He has lost control of his car and he's hit another car. Well, you can see, well, that's too bad. You see, he's drive by. Well, you'll remember that. Maybe you'll mention it to someone later on. But it won't really bother you. It won't disturb your sleep that night. But if you yourself have an accident, if you yourself, God forbid, were to hit another parked car maybe, then we could imagine the turmoil in our mind, and what a tumultuous confusion and denial and anger and fear and bargaining and everything that goes through our minds that upsets our psyche. That is, it has impacted our psyche. It's impacted our personal self. It's left a samskara in the mind. So now we got two words. Well, we got karma, and we've got samskaras. And don't be afraid of Sanskrit words. Sanskrit is the language of this Vedanta philosophy. These are words that we don't have comparable words for in English, like we say impression. Well, it doesn't quite capture the idea of a samskara. And the image there, which is often used, is let's say that you take a pebble and you throw a pebble into the water. And what happens? Well, there's a splash, and the pebble sinks to the bottom, and then there's waves on the surface, and the waves go. There's a whole wave motion effect. The waves travel out towards the edge of the pond. And then maybe they travel back again, and pretty soon the waves die down. And if the pond is very clear, you can look down through the water, and you can see that pebble is resting there at the bottom of the pond. That pebble is like the memory. That's a memory trace. There it is. You can see it. But the samskara is more like the energy that is to say, the waves have died down, yes, but by the great law of the conservation of energy, there's still a vibration of energy in that pond. That pond is retaining the result of that action, that is that pebble falling in the water, is somehow retained in an energy form. There remains a quantum of energy. Now this refers, this is a samskara, that is the result of our action. This refers to all of our actions, our thoughts, our feeling, not our feelings, our thoughts. Feeling is just an aura of thought. Our thoughts, our speech acts, and our deeds. Now, if a thought just goes through your mind, that's not karma. But if you pursue that thought, that is, if you intentionally repeat that thought, then it becomes a karma. Don't underestimate the importance of thought karma. Do you remember the story about the wandering monk? Well, he wasn't a very good monk, but he certainly looked like the genuine, he looked like a monk from central casting. That is to say, he had long matted hair, he had a long beard, he wore an orange flaming robe and an orange turban, and he had marks on his forehead and Rudraksha beads around his neck. And as he walked in, came into the town, came into the city, great city of Calcutta, looking for a place where he could stay, came near down those lanes and those little alleyways near the Kali temple. He found himself a nice spot by the side of the road. He spread his mat, and there he sat down on his mat, and he crossed his legs in yoga fashion, closed his eyes, and sure enough, devotees on the way to the shrine stopped. They say, "Oh, look at this holy man." And they laid a few pice, that is a few pennies, on his mat. Some put little offerings of food, and the monk sat there and he thought, yes, very good. This is a good place. Well, as he sat there, he couldn't help but notice, he looks there across the street. It so happened that he had laid his mat there in a lane which was across the street from the house of a Nach girl. And as he curiously watched, he saw that, yes, that there a customer would go in and come out. Another one would go in and come out. Pretty soon he figured out what was going on there, and his mind was in great turmoil. He was in a very sinful place. And when the poor girl came out in the afternoon, as she usually did, to go and make pranams to the Divine Mother in the temple, she saw the holy man there. She came to lay some flowers at his feet. And the holy man there, he shook his finger at the earth. "You are a very bad girl. I say you're a very sinful girl. If you continue your sinful ways, when you die after death, you will go to a terrible place in the netherworld. You have to change your way, your ways. You're making up a lot of very bad karma." Well, the poor girl was just devastated to hear this. And she went crying into the temple, prayed to the Divine Mother, "Mother, please help me. I don't know what to do. I was born into this caste, so I don't know how to change. Please help me." She went back. The next day, the time passed, nothing changed. The monk sat there observing. He saw the same thing. People would come in, they would go out, and so nearby he found himself a few pebbles. He said, "I have to keep track of this." Put one pebble there, he saw one go in, he saw another come out, put another pebble. And so he kept a tally of the customers. And sure enough, one day the girl comes out in the afternoon to go to the temple, and he accosts her saying, "Girl, come here. So look at this. You see this pile of pebbles? Every one of those is one of your sins. Do you imagine the bad karma that you're building up here day after day? And you have to repent and change your ways." Well, she was devastated. She went to the temple. She was praying to the Divine Mother, came back, and she prayed and she prayed. And, well, it so happened that it wasn't long before one night she was praying, and she just died. And the poor girl died. And what was the coincidence that at that very time, that monk, he had a heart attack and he died. Well, the monk, he was sitting there, he died, his subtle body, a ghost came out of his body. He's looking there, he saw that the body of this poor Nach girl, he saw his own ghost body, and he thought, well, okay, this is good now, at least I can now go to the heavenly worlds. Be a lot more easy to live up there than it was here. Looking forward to my life in heaven. And sure enough, at that time, the sky became light, and he heard the sound of celestial music. And there he saw a golden chariot coming through the air, and in the chariot there were white-robed angels, and the chariot came down right down into that very lane, and the angels of death, they got out, and what happened? Well, they went over and they picked up the body of the Nach girl and carried her gently to the chariot, and off it went into the sky. And the monk there, that is the ghost of the monk, is sitting there. He said, hey, wait a minute. You've made a big mistake. She is a sinner. I'm the saint. But by this time, the sky had become dark, and the clouds covered the moon and the stars. And all you could hear the great rattling and creaking of an old wooden cart being driven by oxen and by burros and by goats. And there it rumbled through the sky, and there it landed there at that crossroads, and out of it came those Rakshasas and the demons. They grabbed that monk, bound him hand and foot, threw him into the cart, and off they flew to his destination, that is the nether worlds. So that's the Ramakrishna story about the, don't underestimate the power of thought karma we're talking about. But let's talk more a little about, let's go back to our psychodynamics. We talked here about an action. What happens? Your action leaves a samskara. That is to say, there is a quantum of energy left in the psyche after that action. What happens to that quantum of energy? What happens to it? We can't see it. There's no waves on the surface. Imagine your mind is like a pond. It's completely calm now. You can look down, you can see the pebble. What you did before, you remember it, but there's no waves on the surface. There's no evidence to anyone seeing that anything's happened, but the energy is there. We could say it's a quantum of energy. That quantum, that's a samskara. That has a life of its own. It's still vibrating. It still is alive. And it wants to manifest itself. It's not content being a subtle vibration. It wants to be back into a wave again. That's its natural propensity, is to get back into a waveform. And so, therefore, that's why samskaras give rise to desires. That's where desires come from. If you ever ask yourself, where does this desire come from? You have a desire, usually we're an automatic pilot. We don't think about, do introspection, to think, where do these desires come from? Let's say that you're walking through in old India. Maybe it's a very hot day. You're walking along, and you're hungry, and you're thirsty. And what do you see over there under a shade tree? There is a fruit vendor, very common in an Indian city. There he is. He's cutting pieces of mango, and cutting a fresh pineapple, cutting some banana. And if you go over and you give him 1 rupee, then he'll cut those pieces freshly for you and roll them up into a little paper cone, and he'll give you that. And you can eat that, and it's very refreshing, and it feels so nice on a hot day. Now let's say that the time passes, and on your next visit to the market, it's a hot day, and it so happens that you're hungry and you're thirsty. Somehow there comes into your mind the thought, wasn't I around here? Wasn't there a fruit vendor around here somewhere? And you look around, then you get your orientation. You see, yeah, there he is. And you go over, and lo and behold, there you buy another another packet of fresh fruit. Where did that desire come from? Well, that's samskara. That samskara has risen again into the form of a desire. Now, when we have a desire and we act, it's going to leave the impression. It's going to leave a samskara. memory trace also. It's going to leave a samskara in our psyche. Depending now how much of an impression or of a samskara it leaves is going to depend on a lot of different things. We don't have time to discuss all that. But suffice it to say that there are very superficial impressions. I'm going back to the word impressions. You see how hard it is to kind of translate this word samskara as it's used in yoga psychology. But let's say it's just a very superficial impression, or it can be a very deep impression. And if you follow the, I've been reading some of the journal of Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark, of course, they pioneered. They were made it all the way from Missouri all the way to the Pacific Ocean. How did they orient themselves? They just only by the advice of following deer trails, following the Indians. Somehow they mapped out a route. Later on, it became that now people had directions. And so someone could hire a scout and maybe lead a wagon, and the wagon would go over the trail or that had been blazed by Lewis and Clark. But now once one wagon goes, now there's actual trail. Those wagon wheels began to leave some trace. After one wagon comes, then other wagons would come. You'd have a wagon train. They would be on the Oregon Trail. And there was no confusion about where that trail was. That is, there were deep ruts in the road, had been washed away. And that road became, pretty soon, in later years, that became an actual road. And it was surveyed by the state. It became an official road. It became a state highway. So these are all different levels, you see, of the impressions that are made by the habits of our actions. So whenever we act with act with a desire, it will leave an impression in the mind. The impression will generate a desire to repeat that action if it was pleasurable, or desire to avoid that action if it was painful. And that cycle, that's what Dr. Sigmund Freud called repetition compulsion. That's habit. And by habit, that's habit formation. That's how we form habits. And in fact, our whole lives, according to yoga psychology, is based on such cycles, vicious circles. We call it a vicious circle because it keeps repeating and reinforcing itself. And by those cycles of actions form habits. And those habits pretty well describe our life because we are creatures of habit. That is, habit is second nature. And our whole lives we are conditioned by our habits. We are defined by our conditioning because we live largely unconsciously. So that's habits. So we see now the progression. We have karma, we have an action, we have a samskara. The samskara gives rise to a desire. The desire then repeats the cycle. That creates a habit. Now habits themselves, a habit is like a cycle, and it has momentum. And a habit is not, it's like a link in a chain. An individual habit of action, of thought, of speech, or of our physical behavior it doesn't just remain isolated. It follows the laws of the psyche, of the mind. That is the law of attraction, law of correspondence. So that each habit, like birds of a feather flock together, each one of those links, as it were, these are the links that form together, form chains. Now we're talking here about the chains that bind us. These are the chains that bind, the chains of karma that bind us. Many different habits together. If we were to sort them out, we could categorize them into different categories. Together, we get a larger generalization. That generalized description of that group of habits is called, in Sanskrit, a vasana. A vasana we can translate pretty well. We can translate it as a tendency. That is, it's not a particular habit, but it's a more generalized tendency to act in a certain way, a predilection, a kind of a behavior pattern which we can recognize in a person. Now these vasanas, which we can say we could group them. Now this is in the unconscious. Where are these vasanas? These vasanas, we can group them generally into two different categories in terms of spiritual practice. And that is, there's the good let's imagine two baskets. There's the good tendencies, the good. There's the shubha and the ashubha, the good and the bad, the right and the wrong. That is, those tendencies and those good habits which lead us onward and upward towards our goal, and those tendencies and habits which lead us downward and away from our goal. This is in our psyche where we are divided. That is, and our minds are divided, and we have the iconic image there of the man who doesn't know what to do. What shall I do? Well, as we look there, we can see that on one shoulder there's a little angel on one shoulder, whispering in his ear what to do. On the other shoulder, there's a little devil, a little demon, whispering in his ear what to do. So he has to listen to one, he has to listen to us. So similarly is our state. This is our condition. We have good samskaras. That's our angel. Just imagine, here you are, you have an angel on one side, you have a demon on the other. This is Dr. Jekyll here. That's a good guy. This is Mr. Hyde. This is all men, all human beings, yet that is, you're divided. They're two birds on the self-same tree. We have two selves. We're divided against ourselves. This is why we're not at peace, because we have two opposite tendencies, one at war. There's the spirit and the flesh. This is a war going on. And here we are, now we're caught between the Vidyamaya and Avidyamaya. Two voices are speaking to us. And these are the vasanas. Where are these vasanas? Well, in Indian yoga psychology, faculty psychology, it doesn't clearly give us a picture about where these vasanas are at. Now they talk about the chitta, which is often translated as memory, but as we're moving to say this is not memory. So therefore, let's just go over to a good old Dr. Sigmund Freud. And we can see that Dr. Freud tells us that in the typology of mind, that is in Freudian psychology, these samskaras reside in the unconscious. And the unconscious is visualized, we could say, as a great lake. Freud often described it as a great sea of memories, of thoughts, of feelings, of memories, of images, all of which are submerged and repressed and not available to our conscious mind. And the image there, I don't have a clock here. What time is it?
11:40.
Oh, okay. So we can imagine the image of a, I'm sure that some of you have seen that famous iconic image of the iceberg, where you see it's an overview, it's like an aerial view, purported to be a photograph. Whether it's a photograph or a photoshopped image, we don't know. But it's a beautiful, striking image because you see an iceberg, little pure white iceberg above the dark blue water of the ocean. And there you're looking from above there, you can see also the huge, vast undercarriage of that iceberg, which is about 50 times bigger than the little pinnacle that rises above the surface. And so it's a very good image to understand the conscious mind, which is like a film. Swami Vivekananda says what we call the conscious mind is just a film. It's just a very thin film between the unconscious and the superconscious. We think it's everything's consciousness. No, it's not consciousness. Consciousness, what we call conscious, our conscious life, is just a film between that. So it's Freud. So Freud says, yes, beneath this is the vast levels of the unconscious. That is the vasanas. To use that Sanskrit word, of all of our tendencies, all of our deeper behavioral patterns that describe our nature and what we are. Now, Dr. Freud maintained that the rational man is a victim and a puppet of the unconscious. That the rational man has very little power to determine his destiny. That's why they sometimes say Freud is a guy he took the psyche out of psychology. That is to say, there's no more in the sense of the Plato's concept of a psyche, which is ruled by reason. That's out the window. Now we are ruled by the unconscious mind. This is the Freudian thesis. Now, yoga psychology, of course, is radically different. And the great law of karma, radically different from this. Because according to karma, although, yes, there is this, we do have these vasanas, good, remember, good and bad, positive and negative, shadow. We hear talking, people do the dark shadow, and there's a light shadow. These are both in our conscious. There's both there access. Vidya Maya, avidya Maya. Every moment of every day, we're making choices. Says the Katha Upanishad, second chapter. Shreyascha, preyascha. We're making difference between the good and the pleasant. That is are we accessing? See, these vasanas are like a circuit. They're like two circuit boards that channel our will. That's a psychic prana, is our will. So what we will, our will is determined by which circuit it's running through. Is it running through the circuit of the good vasanas or the bad vasanas? Now, according to yoga psychology, our actions are not determined by our samskaras, by our impressions. We're not creatures of habit. That is to say, yeah, we are in a sense, but we're certainly not victims of our past. That is to say that we have the power to change and to choose our actions. Now, this is an important point. I made that before. Karma is intentional, self-conscious, volitional action. That's why freedom is so important, because anything which you do under coercion goes to build up attachment, goes to increase your bondage. So you should never do anything under coercion. So the point being is that the analogy, here's the analogy given by the Karmavadins. That is, the Karmavadins means those who subscribe to endorse this doctrine of karma, which is held in common by all the orthodox schools of Indian philosophy, and in some form or other by all forms of Indian philosophy, even the Buddhists. And the analogy used by the Karmavadins is that of the archer. That is, you are like an archer. And your act of karma is just like an archer, has a quiver full of arrows, and there we can visualize him in a forest. And there is he's going to shoot his a bow. And by the way, when you do an action, every action that you do has got two possible effects. Or that is, it will have two effects. There will be two effects of any action that you do. One of those effects is going to be immediate and direct and personal. The other effect is going to be immediate, indirect, delayed, and roundabout. Let's say that you have a guy who's has a high-powered hunting rifle. He goes out with a rifle, and he aims the rifle. He's going hunting, and he sees something moving through the trees. He puts that heavy hunting rifle up to his shoulder, and he pulls the trigger. What happens? Well, that's an action. Now, there's two effects of that action. One is immediate and direct. That is, the rifle will kick back and maybe bruise his shoulder. It's such a high-powered rifle. That's the first effect. The second effect is the bullet is driven forward by the explosion outside to drive forward to kill that deer. But it turns out it wasn't a deer. It was actually the farmer's cow. And the farmer comes running over there. He sees his cow has been shot. He calls the police. The police, pretty soon you hear the sirens. The police come. They arrest the man. They take him off to jail. You see how that went around? That's a cycle like a boomerang. That's the second effect of karma. That was what we're not talking about this morning. What we're talking about this morning is the direct, immediate effect on our character. That is like the kickback of the rifle. That's one effect. The other effect, which is roundabout, which is also described by the great law of karma, that's a subject of a completely different discourse. So now let's go back here to the Karmavadins, how they're talking here about are we subject to the vasanas? No, the analogy they are given is not a hunter with a high-powered hunting rifle, but rather of an archer. And he's an archer, and he's out in the forest, and he has a quiver full of arrows, and he has put one arrow on the bow, and one arrow has already been shot. This is why they talk about three kinds of karma. Your prarabdha karma, that is the things you've already done, that's the arrow gone. Then there's the sanchita karma, which are all the things which are in the vasanas, which are not yet manifested. That's waiting in the quiver. But then, now you have the kriyamana karma. That means now you have no control over that arrow you've shot. That's over. And now the arrows you don't know where the arrows in your quiver are what's going to happen to them. But you do know, and you do have control over that arrow which is on your bow. That is your act of karma. Your act of karma in the present moment is to control that action of the of the kriyamana karma, that is your action in the present moment, and that will determine the result. So then we can see karma. You act with a desire. Desire leaves an impression. Impression creates a desire. The action leaves a samskara. The samskara, then repetition creates a habit, and the habit builds up to form a tendency. And those tendencies themselves now have become traits of your character. This is how your character is built. And there's an old Buddhist verse that goes like that: you sow a thought, you reap an action. You sow an action, that is to say, an action that is prompted by desire. Then you leave an impression. You leave a samskara. Your samskara will automatically will surface again in the similar circumstance to produce another action of a similar kind, whether it's positive or negative, raga or dvesha, then those habits will again build into tendencies. So you sow a habit, you reap a tendency. You act as you are conditioned to act according to your natural tendencies. That is, you follow the natural man, then you will build a character. And you sow a tendency, you reap a character. You sow a character, you reap a destiny. So that's kind of the whole progression. Now our condition is such that for the most part, the ordinary man, his character has been formed unconsciously. That is to say, the ordinary person, including ourselves, is like a sandstone, like the sandstone rock in a canyon. The wind blows down through the canyon, and the wind then forms just by its natural laws of movement. Unconsciously, the rock will begin to be eroded, and shapes both beautiful and grotesque will emerge. It's all happening by fate. That's how it usually happens. That's kind of the story of the most people of why we describe why we are what we are. The challenge of spiritual life is to change that. To re-own your power. That means to take the power, no longer allow yourself to be shaped by the winds of fate and nature, to take control over your life and to become a sculptor of the rock of your own character. And you're like Michelangelo. Michelangelo maybe is given a huge rock in the form of a monkey. Now what's he going to do? Well, slowly he's going to begin. He's not going to rest content with that. He's not going to be happy with that. No, slowly he's going to begin to chip away with a hammer and chisel, act by act, karmic act by deed, until he chisels out a great sculpture. And so similarly as with us, that this is we need to take charge of our destiny. The law of karma and this doctrine of karma, it gives us some insight into the psychodynamics of how we can take control of our destiny and how we can become sculptors of our own nature, and how we can begin to become more conscious of our thoughts, our words, and our deeds, so that we can form ourselves in the image of God. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksha Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Saravam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Same Shantirehi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal peace enter our souls and beings. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.